Hey, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new book by Michael Swanson, The War State. In The War State, Swanson examines how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy both expanded and fought to limit the rise of the new national security state after World War II. If this nation is ever to live up to its creed of liberty and prosperity for everyone, we are going to have to abolish the empire. Know your enemy. Get The War State by Michael Swanson. It's available at your local bookstore or at Amazon.com in Kindle or in paperback. Just click the book in the right margin at scotthorton.org or thewarstate.com. Now to our first guest on the show today, Sheldon Richman. He's the vice president of the Future Freedom Foundation, and he's the editor of their monthly journal, The Future of Freedom. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and always great to be with you.
Good, good. Very happy to have you here. And, I don't ever mention your own website, Free Association at sheldonrichman.com enough, but it's a hell of a great blog. People ought to go back and look through that thing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so lots to talk about here. I'm not sure which order to take it in. I guess, first of all, did you see the Robert Kaplan piece in defense of empire in the Atlantic today?
Yes, I did. I read it.
So we just talked about this from the exact opposite point of view, of course, a week ago for your last piece about how America's always been an empire. And I thought, I don't know, man. In a way, I just completely reject every bit of this, right? But I want to try to be fair to him, even if he is the devil, and see if you can really, I'll do my best anyway to be the devil's advocate here and make you defend a complete Switzerland foreign policy for America, or even statelessness that couldn't possibly intervene anywhere without a state to intervene. For this society when the whole rest of the world is in jeopardy. For those who haven't seen it, basically he makes the unapologetic case for the white man's burden, as he puts it, that the rest of the world is chaos stand and we gotta put him in line. And so he says if there's one honest criticism about Western imperialism, especially American imperialism, it might be how expensive it is. And so we better be really careful how we implement it because we don't want to spend too much money. But other than that, you're damn right those foreigners need to do it our way or else. Because after all, and he sort of has a point, their way sucks, man. Their way is all tribalism and ethno-nationalism and constant warfare, not like our enlightened kind.
Well, yeah, some years ago there were what we called cheap hawks. Gary Hart was one of them. Now we have cheap imperialists because Kaplan is concerned with the cost, and so he wants a more modest empire. He says we ought to be really careful about where we put troops, and otherwise we should kind of keep things under control, but try to have we don't have to do it directly where that's possible. And so at least he's a fiscally responsible imperialist, I guess we could say.
There you go.
Yeah, his thesis, which you also see from Neil Ferguson and Deepak Lal and probably Max Boot and a whole bunch of them, Weekly Standard types, is that you do need an empire. In other words, and when they say empire, they mean like de facto world government. That's what they mean. Because who's going to keep the sea lanes open and the airspace open and make sure trade flows and keep these tribes from fighting each other? But he left out a whole lot of stuff. I mean, all the violence perpetrated by the British in taming the heathen, not to mention the Americans when they were building their empire, namely slaughtering Indians and slaughtering Filipinos, and he kind of just sort of let that go. And then also he didn't really spend a whole lot of time reminding us that World War I and World War II occurred during his age of empire. That doesn't seem to go very well on the empire's resume, right? The British were dominant when World War I comes along, and still pretty dominant. And the U.S. was rising when World War II comes along. It certainly didn't prevent world wars. So I'm not persuaded by this argument that we need a big empire. Of course, it's the U.S. that he's got in mind. To keep the peace, or else everyone's going to be at each other's throats. Most of the world is not at war. There have been arguments from various people. Jim Payne has a very good book called The History of Force that shows that the warfare when you really look at the big picture and the long stretch of history, that kind of violence has been diminishing. I mean, most countries are not at war with each other, and it's not because the U.S. Stands ready, between every little state, ready to, stop it or be the referee or the traffic cop. So, it's an unimpressive thesis. It just seems to me he wants to justify American hegemonic rule, but he's conscious of the fiscal crisis going on, so he's found a way to, scale it back a bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems to me, too, that, and, I don't know what the guy's thinking, really, but the shallowness of the excuse is revealed by the lies of omission. I mean, he starts the thing by saying, I admit that I don't really even know what's his point of bringing this up and framing it this way, but he says, I admit the British should have done a better job of protecting the Iraqi Jews back when they controlled Iraq. And then he seems to be saying, but, we do a lot better job of things like that, but of course he never gets back to the American occupation of Iraq and the fact that there are now less than a dozen Jews left in the entire country, and that all the Yazidis and the Turkmen and the Assyrian and Chaldean Christians and all of those minority ethnic and religious civilizations have been completely obliterated. They're all now dying in a Syrian refugee camp somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
He knows he's full of it when he brings up minority rights in Baghdad, but then he doesn't dare go back to that subject, because what the hell are you talking about, man? Come on. America's done the worst for the people of Iraq, for especially the minorities of Iraq, than anybody since Genghis Khan.
No, it's a good point. If he's going to start talking about Baghdad, you think it might have been on his mind that the U.S. Basically sponsored ethnic cleansing of Baghdad the last decade. So
completely ridiculous. So
that's true. And then, I didn't mention things like 9/11. The thing is, when you're an empire, people resent it, and they often try to do something about it. Well, we saw what happened on 9/11. We saw people annoyed with the U.S. empire and finally trying to get a little bit of revenge. So, what's he talking about? Keeping order? I just don't see this point. And, better that things be decentralized, and if there's going to be wars, let them be isolated and local rather than be expanded by things like NATO. I mean, that's always, that's always been the big flaw there. They think that the way to reduce violence is to join in local orgies of violence, which just makes things worse.
Yeah, it's funny. He almost sounds like a utopian one-world commie type like H.G. Wells. I forget which movie or which book it is where they end up with a one-world Air Force that just, if anybody makes trouble anywhere in the world, they just bomb them until they stop making trouble, and then everybody lives happily ever after that. Remember that one? The one-world Air Force of utopian?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, America's supposed to be like the school principal, right? And if it catches a fight in the hallway, he's going to be right there and then disciplining the two punks are fighting. It doesn't take into account public choice analysis, which means there's going to be mission creep and self-serving missions, and none of that's there. It's like all this ideal. Oh, I just have the ideal utopian government in mind that's going to do exactly what I think is right and nothing else. There's no sense of the real world dynamic. It's known as the nirvana fallacy, right? You think your utopian ideal is what's actually going to obtain in reality if you get your way. But that's naive. And I'm sure he's not naive, so it's dishonest.
Yeah. Well, and especially when, you just take account of what's going on in the world right now. We back military dictatorships and sultans and emirs and kings and revolutions of suicide-bombing lunatics and sometimes neo-Nazis across the planet Earth. I mean, who's being done a favor here?
Backing neo-Nazis, that hasn't happened for a couple of months. What are you complaining about?
Yeah.
Come on, don't dredge up ancient history. Don't dredge up ancient history.
We gotta bring up old stuff all the time, Scott. Oh, that guy's the Attorney General of Ukraine now. Oops. You
gotta look forward. As Obama says, we have to look ahead. Let's not no recriminations.
Crazy. All right, now, but wait a minute here. So there's a guy named Basevich. You know him, Andrew Basevich, writes great anti-imperialist type of stuff a lot of times. And he was always my pick for Ron Paul's Secretary of Defense if they hadn't stolen the nomination from Ron Paul. Yeah. He would have been a great Secretary of Defense for Ron. And anyway, so I was interviewing him one time, and I was saying, and he's a very pragmatic guy. I know you're very familiar with him. He can speak from a very dispassionate, amoral, American national strategist point of view. And he says, hell yes, we ought to get out of the Middle East. We're not doing a thing over there but causing trouble. But no way in the world should we get out of the Far East, because right now we are what's creating and maintaining that delicate balance of power that keeps Japan and China from going back to war. These guys got some ancient enmities, and they got some border disputes, and we are the superpower. We're the gorilla in the room that keeps them apart. And we're the reason, our security guarantee is why Japan does not rearm and even go nuclear weapons hot, right? And we're the reason that the Chinese don't even bother thinking twice about invading Taiwan and taking back Taiwan, because we're there to keep it that way. And so now, if Ron Paul's in charge, or if you have your way, Sheldon, then that means that possibly could lead to major power conflict in a place where, at least according to Basevich, we seem to be keeping the warring factions apart. Maybe throw in the Korean Peninsula there. I'm not saying you have to agree with the premise of the question, by the way, but seems like an honest one. Oh, and crap, now we got to take a break, and I'll let you answer that when we get back from the break. It's Sheldon Richman from FFF.org. Hey, all, Sky here. First, I want to take a second to thank all the show's listeners, sponsors, and supporters for helping make the show what it is. I literally couldn't do it without you. And now I want to tell you about the newest way to help support the show. Whenever you shop at Amazon.com, stop by ScottHorton.org first, and just click the Amazon logo on the right side of the page. That way, the show will get a kickback from Amazon's end of the sale. It won't cost you an extra cent. And it's not just books. Amazon.com sells just about everything in the world, except cars, I think. So whatever you need, they've got it. Just click the Amazon logo on the right side of the page at ScottHorton.org, or go to ScottHorton.org/Amazon. All right, you guys, welcome back to the show here. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. We're on Liberty Express Radio and Daily Paul Radio and Liberty Radio Network and Anomaly Radio and ARS Radio and Radio. ScottHorton.org/listen. You can also find all my archives there at ScottHorton.org. You can join up the chat room there at ScottHorton.org/chat. You can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/Scott Horton Show. Enough already. Okay, so now, back to Sheldon Richman, and the question is, yeah, but Sheldon, collective security is sort of kind of keeping the peace somewhere, possibly, and so what if we take our finger out of the dike and all hell breaks loose and major powers go to war with each other?
Well, look, aside from the fact that for the U.S. to be the policeman of the Far East, for it to do that, it has to violate the rights of Americans through taxation and other things. We know what happens when the government has a big military establishment. It eventually comes home, and of course that's already happened. So it has implications domestically regarding surveillance and other sorts of things, military-industrial complex. Aside from all those problems, it just presumes that the policymakers, who are mere mortals, let's remember, they're not demigods. They may be demigods, but they're not demigods. It presumes they have the knowledge it takes to, enter into a complicated situation and manage things. And, more often than not, you got to expect that that's going to backfire and not only hurt people there, but hurt us as well. He may be attributing the lack of war between China and Japan to the United States, but I don't know how he can be certain of that. I think you need to bet that the government, being a bull in the china shop, is going to sooner or later mess things up. So let's not have our blood on our hands.
Yeah. Well, especially look at that situation in Korea, where the reason that the Chinese are willing to continue propping up that commie dictatorship, the actual commie dictatorship there, land of starvation and darkness, real totalitarianism, is because it keeps the Americans down there at the 38th parallel, man. And if they reunify Korea, then, that'll just bring the Americans that much closer, back up to the Yalu River. And so they would just as soon, keep the North Korean people enslaved under the Kim Jong-un regime, which is, of course, I guess it seems to be fine with the Americans, too, because they don't want to see nuclear North Korea combined with capitalist South Korea, or, pseudo-capitalist South Korea, in a way that would make the recombined Korea an actual Pacific power in its own right, rather than just a satellite of ours. So,
well, I've actually read, and this might have come from Bondo, who, of course, is a career watcher from way back, that the Chinese don't want the U.S. to leave the peninsula because they're afraid if there's chaos in the north, North Koreans will pour into China, which they don't want. So there are many counterintuitive things going on there.
Yep. Well, Fitz in the chat room is saying, if we let Japan build a nuke, then Beijing and Tokyo be at standoff, and just like every other set of nuclear powers in the world. I mean, hell, it keeps the peace between India and Pakistan mostly. I mean, they have border skirmishes from time to time, but they never go to outright war now that they have nukes. I mean, so far, cross fingers.
Well, I think there's something to that, and of course, none of us should be comfortable or sleeping totally sound at night with nukes in the world. I mean, I was saying earlier on another program that the number one priority regarding China, Russia, and the U.S., and I've heard you say something like this, it should be dismantling the nuclear arsenal. I mean, that ought to be the top priority, and I don't know why people are not screaming about that instead of talking about Crimea.
Right.
So I just have
need
no
another
confidence
Steve
in the
Gutenberg movie, ABC movie of the week about what a nuclear war would look like in your neighborhood. That was pretty effective propaganda back then. They say it sort of shocked Ronald Reagan. He thought, man, that really would be ugly, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, good point. And I heard you saying that, and I think this is right. That people seem to think that on the Christmas Day of 1991, when the hammer and sickle came down for the last time, that somehow the nukes just disappeared, just vanished into thin air like that Malaysian airliner.
Yeah. Well, they say that they retargeted them away from their targets, but still, it's just a matter of punching in the same coordinates from the list again. And
I heard Andrew Mitchell. I think say today that they're not on hair trigger any longer.
Yeah. I'm not going to take anyone in her family's word for anything.
That's my attitude too. And besides, how long does it take to turn a couple of keys anyway, right?
Right. Well, and anybody can Google this if you want to freak everybody out at dinner tonight or whatever. Go and look up the 20-something times that there almost was an accidental war between America and Russia based on a misinterpreted satellite launch or some misinterpreted tic-tac-toe results or, whatever kind of thing. There's about 20 of those over the years. Yes, I know that's a movie reference, but there's about 20 of those over the years where they almost went to war, and then usually it's got some great story, like one guy refused to follow the chain of command and his orders because his gut instinct was that this can't be right. And thank goodness, because if he had passed on the pseudo information, then we'd have lost New York City over it,
Well, yeah, we should be more nervous about that, and they should be getting much more attention. But people think it went away. So I have to disagree with Professor Baskovich on this, and I just think it's asking for trouble.
Well, yeah. Anyway, so there you go. I'm trying to find like some kind of depth here to try to defend, or a position to really try to take, but it all just seems kind of ridiculous. And of course, the whole article here goes, and we're not talking Basovich, we're talking about Robert Kaplan here, In Defense of Empire in the Atlantic. The whole thing just ignores the existence of individual human beings and their right to not be murdered whatsoever. That's just not even part of it at all. He just talks about, after this particular European power conquered that particular group of people somewhere else on the planet, years later they do better, or whatever. These kinds of very broad strokes that deny actual humanity. And a lot of broad assertions of power, too, that, without the U.S. Navy, there could be no globalization. Well, really? Why not? Which power is going to intercept all shipments on the high seas if the U.S. Navy isn't there to protect them,
Right. Besides, let the business companies, the companies that want to ship goods, pay for their own protection of their ships or planes. Why should those costs be socialized? And that gives unfair advantage to the big global companies versus smaller companies, because instead of the price of that security showing up in the price of goods, which would put them at some competitive disadvantage to other companies, we pay it as taxpayers, and so it doesn't show up at the cash register. That's unfair. I mean, that's a lot like government subsidizing railroads, which of course the U.S. government did in the 19th century, which allowed the growth of which deliberately engineered the national market and created behemoth companies that had advantages because of socialized costs over smaller local and regional companies.
I think you just came across a great reason for liberals to oppose empire even while Democrats are in power, because it's just welfare for Walmart, so that they don't have to pay for all their own security costs on the high seas to outsource all those jobs and everything. Union jobs.
I don't see why that's seen as a government job to keep sea lanes open. Companies can pay for that if that's what they want to do. If that means there's less globalization, okay, so there's less globalization. It's just like people argue, well, if you don't have eminent domain, we won't have such large airports. And the answer is okay, so we won't have such large airports.
Yeah. Boy, and don't even get me started on the corporate welfare for the airlines. Like upper middle class and rich people have a right to fly that all working folk have a duty to subsidize. You know what? Walk.
Yeah.
I get tired of that, man. There are people who never fly in a plane their whole life, but they sure pay for other people's way all day and night.
Yeah.
Ain't right. All right.
Well, and that's just like, owners of passenger automobiles pay a disproportionate amount of the money to repair the interstate highways, which is a subsidy to the big trucking and shipping shippers that move stuff across the country. They don't pay the full cost of the damage they do to the roads. They do most of the damage to the roads, not cars, but we owners of cars pay most of the repair cost. That's a subsidy.
The state, it's just a gigantic welfare program for business in this society.
Right, and most of the welfare goes up. That's right.
All right, now we're almost out of time for this segment, so I guess I'll ask you if you wouldn't mind hanging through the news, and then we could do one segment on Ukraine, or I can let you go, depending on your schedule.
I can hang on.
Okay, great. Well, you can go ahead and take a break, because it's about a 6-minute news break coming up here.
Okay.
Guess I started saying that a little bit early. But anyway, it's Sheldon Richman. He's the vice president of the Future Freedom Foundation, and he is the editor of their monthly journal, The Future of Freedom. And he's got 2 great articles here. Today's is The American Disease. We got to talk about that, and which, it goes along with what we've been talking about a little bit. And then also he's got this great one about Ukraine and just how accidentally on purpose the Democrats' big blunder there is. So we're going to find out all about that on the other side of this break. It's the Scott Horton Show, scotthorton.org, libertyexpressradio.com. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for wallstreetwindow.com. Mike Swanson is a successful former hedge fund manager who provides his subscribers with a very real window into his investments, updating them on every move he makes in the markets. Right now, Mike's anticipating a bear and is dumping all his stocks while the getting is good, investing instead in gold and the commodities. Protect your assets and learn the wise ways of the markets. wallstreetwindow.com. And check out Mike Swanson's great contribution to the history of the rise of the American empire and the war state. Available at scotthorton.org/Amazon. All right, you guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. I'm talking with Sheldon Richman from the Future Freedom Foundation. He's the vice president there and the editor of their journal, The Future of Freedom. His website is sheldonrichman.com. Free association is the blog there. Aye, free as a tethered ass. That's the slogan over there at Free Association. And now, before we move on to the Ukraine rundown here, because you got a great write-up on what's going on over there for the FFF, but you also have this thing that's out today, The American Disease, and this goes along with the hypocrisy of all that white man's burden crap we were just talking about, Robert Kaplan's article in the Atlantic about all of that. And this is about, you focus mostly on something that really caught my attention, too, when I read this interview with Stephen F. Cohen in Newsweek. He's the guy who, I believe he's married to the editor of The Nation, Katrina vanden Heuvel, or however you say it. And he is, as they call him in Newsweek, the man who dared to defend Putin, which means who dared to tell the truth about what was going on in Ukraine lately, rather than just towing the party line. And because it was such a contentious interview, he does really well because he's pushing back hard against the guy interviewing him, accusing him, basically. And so, he therefore is quite energetic and is pretty broad-ranging in his thinking and the examples that he brought up and all this and that. And then, but the part that I'm talking about, of course, is the blowback for homosexuals in Russia, since the American government especially, but American society really decided that they're our pets to defend from their evil tyrant, Vladimir Putin.
Well, that's right. The general point, and what I mean by the disease is the people who catch the disease are opposition movements in foreign countries that are not allies of the United States. So when a movement arises to oppose an authoritarian government in a country that is not an ally of the U.S., in other words, a government that the U.S. might want to see disappear or replaced, given America's history, the opposition movement is immediately going to be tarred as agents of the CIA or the National Endowment for Democracy, in other words, of America. And that's not an unreasonable assumption, given America's history. Certainly since World War II, it's always had covert operations. These days, it's by a non-government organization that gets tons of taxpayer money, but that goes in there and gives advice on how to do regime change or how to have street mobs or whatever, just like occurred in Ukraine and probably what was going on in Egypt. And it goes back to 1953 and the overthrow of Mossadegh and to restore the Shah. So the disease is the U.S. by its history and activity infects even genuine opposition movements against genuinely odious governments. And it just lets the odious government use the nationalist club against them by telling their people, the population, look, that group there, that opposition group, they're just fronts for American agents and American interests and the IMF and neoliberalism and capitalism. So this history and this policy has done a disservice to the cause of liberty worldwide. Not anything in their favor. And what grabbed me about Cohen's point was, like you said, I'm sure American officials thought they were doing the gaze of Russia a great favor by standing up and condemning that law that Putin signed that says you can't distribute information about non-traditional sexual lives to minors. It was a vague law that could probably capture a lot of people who weren't even doing anything regarding minors. It might have felt good to stand up and condemn that and snub Putin regarding the Olympics, but what it did was hurt the Russian gaze, and that's what Cohen was pointing out. I mean, he's lived there. He knows lots of people. He knows he has friends. He knows Russian gays, and they were telling him this is bad. Shut up already. He has one quote. I won't give it verbatim, but he said a friend of his said that before all this, we were homosexuals. Now we're American homosexuals. And he even knows of legislators who said, I would have voted to get rid of this law, but I can't do it now because America has weighed in. So it hurts the very cause we say, when I say we, the government says it's attempting to advance. It hurts. It sets it back. And I don't think that was their aim anyway. They just wanted to club Putin over the head.
Yep. Well,
I don't think they cared what the consequences were going to be. They just wanted to club Putin over the head and win some, public relations campaign against him. That's it. They don't care what the real facts are on the ground, how it hurt real people. They don't care about that. They don't think about that.
Right. After all, Barack Obama's only been politically correct on the gay marriage issue since after he was reelected. right? his whole first term, he was against gay marriage, for example. And I think the way Cohen says it is like, yeah, Russia, it's really backwards on this issue. It reminds me of where I grew up just a generation and a half ago, whatever, you know. They definitely have a lot of progress to make, but they got to make it. And by the way, just for the context, the quote was that yesterday I was the F word slang for homosexual, so not just homosexual, but the terrible, like, dehumanizing slang for it. And now I'm an American one of those, meaning even that much lower, because now I'm a traitor too. Now I'm a fifth column working for the CIA. You know, that's the point. And we saw that same thing, of course, in Iran with the whole Green Revolution, and really before the Green Revolution, any kind of student group that says we'd like, you know, less law and more representation, that kind of thing, you know, personal restrictions, whatever. Immediately they're labeled tools of the Westerners, tools of the CIA especially.
Right, and the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, you know, is a neocon-infested organization. It's run by Carl Gershman, who's tied in with Robert Kagan and all these people, and, you know, cheered on by Victoria Nuland and the State Department. And they're in there meddling and doing all kinds of stuff to bring the neoliberal program, which means, you know, IMF recommending higher taxes on real people. So they get. It automatically taints any opposition movement. That's the disease, that we infect them with this disease, and it's not right. We're hurting the very people. Again, I'm repeating myself, that we say we want to help. It doesn't help them, and you know, often they tell us thanks but no thanks, or do me a favor, don't do me any favors.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not just that the Americans are hypocrites, but they really are dragging down and back any movement that they claim to be trying to support there, even, like you said, even when they do mean well, which is probably part of the time or something. All right, now, anyway, I'm sorry because this segment's so short, and now we only have like a couple and a half minutes for you to talk about this piece about Ukraine, but it's the perennial question here on this show anyway, stupidity or the plan, overall and in any specific circumstance. Is it a stupid plan? Did the Obama team blunder or conspire in Ukraine, Sheldon?
Well, I think, you know, they could have blundered by conspiring, but I think they conspired. I mean, I don't think it was a good conspiracy, and by that I don't mean any kind of, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, that's not the point. I think they knew exactly what Putin was going to do, or let's say approximately what Putin was going to do by engineering regime change in Ukraine. Nuland and Ambassador Pyatt, you know, we all know about you've played the tape of the telephone conversation, you know, picking out Yats as the guy and how we're going to midwife this, or we need somebody to midwife this. And so it taints any real opposition. You know, the former president. No one's saying. I'm not saying he was a good guy. I don't know anyone who thinks he was a good guy, but he was at least being somewhat accommodating, right? He was talking about early elections and some stuff like that.
Right? Yeah, they made a deal.
That's right. That did not deter the American side from ousting the guy. Even Fareed Zakaria, who's hardly some radical libertarian, called it an extra-constitutional ouster.
All right, but why, though? What kind of blowback? So you're saying they were willing even to lose Ukraine as a pawn on the chessboard, to what end? I mean, not Ukraine, I'm sorry, Crimea. But to what end?
Yeah, well, I think that they gain a lot of things. They gain, first of all, they gain public relations, right? The U.S. has not been held in high esteem around the world. And so this is a chance to demonize Putin. There are business interests involved, not just a military-industrial complex, but places, you know, things like Cargill. You know, if you're reading Robert Parry and other people over at Consortium News, you can see who's gaining. But a bigger thing, and maybe Obama didn't even want this to happen, is that it drives a wedge between Russia and the U.S. on Syria and Iran, and we know who wants to see that wedge. The neoconservatives, and I have to say, the Israel lobby. And Nuland is in that camp.
That's right. Kagan's wife. All right. Thanks, Sheldon. Appreciate it. FFF.org, everybody, for Sheldon Richman. Thanks. Hey, y'all. Scott Horton here for Braswell Business Communication Services at FusePowder.com. Braswell Communications can provide a credentialed media presence for your company at industry conferences and trade shows, as well as support services and consultation for publishing, editorial and technical writing, business-to-business and marketing communications, research, and information campaigns. Braswell also does website development and complete web content maintenance to include voiceover audio and copywriting. Strengthen your business. FusePowder.com. Man, you need some new stickers for the back of your truck. Scott Horton here for LibertyStickers.com. Aren't you sick and tired of everyone else being wrong about everything all the time? Well, now you can tell them all what's right with some stickers from LibertyStickers.com. At LibertyStickers.com, they're against everything, so you know they're good on your issue, too. Whether it's the wars, police, state, gun laws, the left and right, or the president, LibertyStickers.com has hundreds of choices so you can find just the right words to express your opposition and contempt for those who would violate your rights. That's LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. On March 7th at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., the Council for the National Interest is co-hosting the first ever national summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship. Confirmed speakers include Walt, Scheuer, Giraldi, McGovern, Katowski, Porter, McConnell, Weiss, Raimondo, USS Liberty survivor Ernie Gallo, as well as co-sponsors Alison Ware of If Americans Knew and the great Grant Smith of the Institute for Research, Middle East Policy. That's the National Summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship. Friday, March the 7th, all day at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. natsummit.org.